of course, if you have higher and higher deficits, there's so many repercussions, and the biggest of which is the widening deficits mean growing national debt. And so if you look at, as soon as 2027, which is not that far off, the federal debt held by the public at 106% of GDP, to be exact, 106.2% of GDP. I say that number for a specific reason, because at that moment, in the year 2027, we will actually exceed the highest level of debt in U.S. history. And by the year 2054, again, just a couple decades out, the debt is projected to reach a whopping 166% of GDP. These are really big numbers. And I mean, if you got to go back to, we're breaking World War II records back when we bet the farm. And then we actually bet something good on it, by the way, which was World War II.
Well, and I've heard people say things like, well, what's the big deal? We had debt this high before at the end of World War II and it came down. So, well, that's because the war ended. I mean, there's no war to end right now. I mean, this is, as you said, these are routine deficits that high. So that's the problem. It's not necessarily the level of debt, although that's, high and about to set a record. But if I thought debt was going to start coming down or the deficits were going to start coming down, well, that wouldn't be as much of a problem, even if they were just going to stabilize where they are now. But as you pointed out, on our current course, they're just going to keep going higher and higher and higher to reach 166% of GDP and by 2054. But a caveat on that, we were just talking to Rachel about these expiring tax cuts. These numbers, Phil, they assume that the tax cuts expire. Is that right?
That's exactly right. And they're probably not going to expire, right? Because both presidential candidates have some version of not allowing them to expire.
And that would mean if I don't know the number of what would happen 30 years from now, but when we talk about these deficits and the debt levels, they are probably optimistic in the sense that they do assume a revenue gusher after 2025 when these tax cuts expire. And also, linking back to another point we were talking about with Rachel, these long-term projections also assume that discretionary spending, that is the annual appropriations, which are only about 30% of the budget now, are going to shrink to their lowest level as a percentage of GDP, over the next 10 years and stay there, locked in at the lowest percentage of GDP ever. So we're probably going to have more, higher spending on emergencies, whether it's climate related, weather emergencies. We're certainly seeing hurricanes and floods and tornadoes, fires. There are national security issues that you can look at left and right. So assuming that we're going to be locked in to a very low, historically low level of discretionary spending or appropriations is not realistic. So, I mean, if you look at combining a more realistic level of discretionary spending and a more realistic estimate about taxes, that 166% of GDP climbs, above 200% of GDP.